Hello and welcome to After Scientology Straight Up and Vertical, the last, our first show for 2024, last wrap up of 2023. Tony, welcome back to the show.
Happy New Year, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We skipped last week because I took the Christmas weekend, and so we went, yeah, let's just skip a week. So we have a little bit to make up for that. But this show is our year-end wrap-up. So we're actually going to go back and look at some things over the entire year of 2023 and use this show for New Year's as a kind of a let's put a bow on it for 23. And there were some pretty cool, pretty interesting things that happened. This was an interesting year in the fight against Scientology. And probably the biggest example of that and the biggest thing that was on most of our minds this year was the Masterson trial and retrial. Tony, take it away. What's the whole story here on this whole thing?
Well, it was a retrial this year at the very beginning of the year, first week of January, like the 9th or 10th or something. We learned that the prosecutors were going to try him for a second time.
Yep.
And, I just felt for these women because they had testified in the preliminary hearing and they'd been cross-examined. They testified in the first trial and they'd been cross-examined, and now they were going to have to do it a third time. So that was something we all had to go through in April and May, was seeing the Jane Does go through all that again. And thinking back to my, those days I was in court, a couple of things still stand out to me all these months later. First of all, that Ariel Anson, the deputy DA, had such a bigger role this time, and it really paid off. She was fantastic in the opening. She was incredible in the closing. She did a very good job questioning witnesses. Reinhold Mueller, I felt, upped his game. He also did a very good job asking really good questions. Avoided, in the first trial, there was some stuff that just didn't seem to very interesting or to pay off. He avoided all that this time. And then what I also think about this trial, I really do think it was important, not as important as these women going through this again and really giving it back to Philip Cohen and really doing a good job. But in the first trial, the defense did their best to put doubt in the mind of the jurors by they kept talking about contamination. Right. This was a big part of their case, that this Detective Reyes had told these women, you shouldn't be talking to each other. If you talk to each other, you contaminate the case, you ruin the case. And that these women were unhappy with her, and they had talked to each other about it, and they'd gotten her replaced. And now there was this new detective, but they continued to talk to each other. And, Philip Cohen just over and over again, this was a major theme of the defense, that the case was hopelessly compromised because these women had ignored what Detective Reyes had told them and had contaminated the case.
Yeah.
Well, in the second trial, Ariel Anson called Detective Reyes to the stand. And for the first time, she was never asked this the first trial. For the first time, she said, okay, you told them not to talk to each other, but they did talk to each other. Yes, they did. Did that contaminate the case? And she said, no, I don't believe it did. And you could just see she was the defense star witness. And I remember thinking, that's it. Yep. They just lost this case. It was, and Philip Cohen, when he was cross-examining her, he was physically angry. You could see that his witness had been destroyed.
Yeah.
So I don't want to diminish what the Jane Does did. Their testimony was fantastic. They were under pressure. But I thought that was one of several key moments that has stuck with me all these months later. And so I got to tell you, after 8 days of deliberation, I was still worried that it was going to be another hung jury.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, I was in that hallway with the Masterson family. I was just a couple of feet away from Danny. They seemed buoyant, and I really think they thought they were getting a hung jury that day.
Yep.
And I think we were all stunned when it came back with 2 guilty verdicts. And Bijou made her wail, and Danny got handcuffed and taken away. And now he's been in custody for like 7 months now, and he's been moved to state prison. But what a moment. I'm just glad I got to be there every day and put out those multiple reports a day. People, I think, really appreciated, because there were no cameras, Chris. So reading my version of what was going on was at least to give you some sense of what was going on in the room.
That's right.
And so I'm glad I got to do that.
Absolutely. It was great coverage, and it was and way more than we would have gotten otherwise had it just been, pool reporters giving an end of the day report on it, right? It's because you were giving us transcripts of basically what was happening and who was saying what. And and I'm just going to say, I mean, it really gave us a window on a daily basis into what was happening, and really gave us a lot of sort of this is how it really is. This is not Law and Order. This isn't SVU. This doesn't wrap up in an hour. This is how it really goes. And the witnesses and the testimony and the kind of how you make a case. Claire Headley being an expert witness as a former survivor, right? Discussing Scientology in detail to the jury and its policies. Another difference from the first case where they sort of
Yep.
thought that it seemed that the prosecution thought a few references in Scientology's direction and a few points made in testimony would be enough. And we learned that was not enough at all. And they really upped the game on the Scientology angle in this second trial as well, which I thought, lent a lot of credibility to what the witnesses had gone through, the Jane Does, as far as why it had taken them years and why this was dragging out and why are we talking about this 20 years later. I thought that they made a very cogent narrative story, right, for the jury as to how that happened and why, right? And I thought that was important.
And I really assume that in the appeal that's coming from Danny's attorneys, that will be one of the things they zero in on. They will
Probably
they
so.
will try to convince a different court, an appellate court,
Mm.
that Judge Olmedo made a mistake by allowing so much Scientology testimony. And they're going to basically try to convince the appellate court that Danny's religion was on trial, that this shouldn't have been part of his trial. Judge Olmedo went through that at length,
Yeah.
explaining why it was important to understand why these women had not come forward sooner because they were terrified of the Church of Scientology. They had good reason to be. So we'll see. I mean, that we know, that's got to be one of the major things that Danny's defense tries in the appeal. So, but we'll just have to wait to see what he does.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Hard to tell. Because I'm not as familiar with the appeal process as I have come to learn with the whole civil lawsuit process and now the criminal process and now there's this appeals process. So I'm sure we will get,
Well, the important thing to know is that in the appeal, it's not a second look at the facts. He can't go back and say, listen, can you believe they believed A, B, and C that these women said? No. You have the appeals court looks at the process.
mm,
Did Danny get a fair trial? Did the judge operate a fair trial? And so they're going to be focused on her decisions, not so much what these women said on the stand. So that's the key
right.
thing about the appeal is they're going to be judging Judge Olmedo, and so it'll be very interesting to see how that goes.
It will. It very much will. But we do know also, and I think we've mentioned this a few times, that this is a years long process that we're getting into now. It's not like 2024 is going to see, the release of Danny Masterson or something. I mean, this is going to take a while to go through the system. Is that right?
Well, so that he will be turning in a detailed appeal brief. I don't know when that's coming. February, March, I don't know.
Okay.
At that point, there will there will be an opportunity for responses, replies, letters to friend of the court letters. There may be some other requests from the court for information, but it's going to take a while for the court to sift through all that, and I'm sure they'll be asking for a new trial, and the appellate court will have to ask, well, that's what they'll have to decide was, did this judge handle things incorrectly, so Danny deserves another shot, and that would be a new trial. And I don't know. I've been told by reporters that know a lot more about this that they feel with a jury convicting someone of rape that it's going to be hard for an appellate court to overturn it.
Yep.
But again, this is Danny paying a lot of money to some very good attorneys. They're going to take their best shot.
Yep. Fair enough. Fair enough. Two counts of rape, by the way, out of the ones that were needed. And then one last thing, just in terms of the fallout from that trial that was really unlooked for, really surprised me, was the Ashton Kutcher Mila Kunis, blow up, right? Because of the letters that they submitted,
Right.
to say Danny's a good man of strong moral fiber. Boy, did that blow up in their faces.
There were three really big sideshows to Danny Masterson's conviction of forcible rape. One, of course, was what a beating the Church of Scientology took, because everybody got up on that stand and said, as a Scientologist, I was taught that I could not turn in a fellow Scientologist, that I would be punished for being a victim. Witness after witness. That was brutal for Scientology. Second, we found out that Danny's first set of attorneys, Tom Mesro and Sharon Applebaum, had leaked the prosecution's sensitive evidence to the Church of Scientology. Absolutely outrageous. Judge Olmedo was unhappy about that. She sanctioned them for that. Again, it just goes to how Scientology plays dirty in everything.
That's
They
right.
then used that to try to convince the LAPD to undermine the case. I mean, just incredible. And the third big sideshow was Megan Kuniff and I both realized that once the sentencing was done, then the court would release any letters that had been sent to the judge asking for leniency. And those are always interesting.
Yep.
And we got our hands on those, and we published those. Megan and I published those the morning of September 8th, the day after the sentencing. And wow, Chris, I mean, I knew people were going to be interested in Ashton and Mila's letters. So the first three I put up were Bijou's letter, Ashton's letter, Mila's letter, and then some others. A lot of letters. And
Yeah.
wow, it blew up. I mean, people were so outraged. Not just that Ashton and Mila were writing to the court asking for leniency for Danny, but that they talked about him like he was the greatest guy ever,
Yeah.
and that he was anti-drugs. And it's like, do you know what he's convicted of? He's convicted of drugging and raping women. So I think the tone deaf letters of those, tone deaf tone just really blew up on them.
Yeah.
And there was just a story this week about how Ashton and Mila are still kind of in hiding.
Yeah. Yeah. That was I mean, he gave up his he retired. He's not the CEO of that Thorn outfit, the nonprofit that was built for support of rape victims, right? Or sexual assault victims.
Sexual trafficking, yeah.
Yeah,
So
sexual trafficking. Yeah.
yeah, so he's given up that role, and they've been laying low,
Ooh,
and
yeah,
yeah, that really blew up. So
nasty
again,
fallout.
it wasn't just Danny Masterson being tried for rape. There were all these other issues, and it's been quite an interesting year.
Yeah, that was really quite the year-long event, and it was absolutely the biggest news in regards to the world of Scientology. Now, there was a drop of something during all of this that you and I have commented on a couple times. We don't really have more to say about it except for the fact that it's really noteworthy, and that is that there is a grand jury impaneled about the Church of Scientology. And how long has this been in existence now? What do we know about this?
Well, we first learned about it during the first trial, but it had started in 2018, I think. Reinhold Mueller said in court.
Mm,
So we learned about it last year when Mueller brought some actual testimony by Marty Singer to the court.
right.
Then, as this retrial was starting in April, during a sidebar, I overheard them talking about it. Couldn't help it. There was nobody else in the courtroom but me.
Yep.
And I could hear them saying, and then once they came back into the public and they were no longer sidebar, the judge asked the prosecutor. She said, "That thing the proceeding we were talking about, is that ongoing?" And he said, "Yes, it is, Your Honor." I was like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
That the grand jury's still going 5 years later. So that was in April. He said that the grand jury was ongoing. Is it still going now? We don't know, but um, I think there's some things coming out in the Bixler lawsuit that the grand jury should be paying attention to.
Mm,
And I are we ever going to see additional criminal charges against anybody? I don't know. I mean, they got Danny Masterson, they got him in prison, but the reason he was able to carry on for so long, because he had backup from the Church of Scientology, and you
right.
would think might be some other people that could pay a penalty for that, but I don't know.
That's the tricky part. You know, there's this mantra I repeat often about Scientology. I think you do too, that it's always worse than you think. It always proves itself. Every time you think you've hit bottom, something new comes up, something new and horrible and awful comes up. And we've gone all the way down the line to human trafficking and child labor and violation of all kinds of litany of laws and very, very awful behavior that the church has covered up within its own world. You know, us ex-members can speak to that because we saw some of that and whatever. And so this grand jury is, you know, I've got a lot of hopes pinned on this thing because we've been waiting for and watching and hoping for criminal prosecution of the Church of Scientology. And that hasn't happened since the Snow White thing, as far as the federal government really coming down, right? I mean, there have been civil lawsuits that have taken Scientology chunk by chunk, and we've seen a lot of that over the decades, but criminal prosecution, and that's what we really want, at least as far as I'm concerned, because that's the prosecution that actually has teeth and consequences beyond paying out money. So I really have high hopes for this thing. That's why I keep bringing it up, is because I really want to see this thing, you know, I'd like to see some indictments issued from it. Anyway, so just keeping the hope alive out there, folks. Now, the other big thing from this last year was you and Mike Rinder, cancer survivors.
Well, listen, Mike had a much worse situation than I
Oh,
did, but yeah, that was shocking when we learned that he had stage 4 esophageal cancer.
yeah,
And he was having going through some really tough times in the hospital.
yeah.
But he and Christy Colbrand have assembled a great medical team. I just saw him here in New York for a screening of Jeff Levin's movie Brothers Broken. He looked great. He's doing wonderful. It's amazing how well this drug is that he's using, and so I was super happy to see that.
Yeah.
My own situation, yeah, I was completely asymptomatic. I just the only way I knew I had cancer was some numbers on a graph that a doctor gave me.
Right.
But I did go through surgery in August, and that was, a couple of weeks of recovery was not fun. But everything's fine. I'm doing great. And we'll mention a third person, Pete Griffiths, also has had a cancer journey this year, and he's had some serious treatments, and he's doing great. So,
Good.
yeah, really good to be saying goodbye to 2023 and some of those things we had to go through.
Yeah, big time, and good on Pete as well. Love that guy. Okay, now another big thing dropping this year. We've talked about it, we've discussed it in detail, but it must be commented on as one of the major events of 2023. Is Leah Remini filed a civil lawsuit against the Church of Scientology with teeth? I mean, this thing is a serious lawsuit. It's not messing around. How do we talk about this at this point? Where are we at with this thing?
Well, I think some of us felt like, wow, this is something we kind of thought might happen. And so it was great when it happened. August 2nd, she filed her lawsuit. And she's essentially suing Scientology for its fair game campaign of her.
Yep.
Which is so appropriate because that was what their podcast was about, right? Fair game. And she's got this just laundry list of all these smear campaigns and elaborate operations they've run against her. And what impressed me about it so much is how specific it is about ways in which Scientology has interfered with her ability to make a living.
Yeah.
That they are sending these operatives out and doing things to make it, shut down a podcast, shut down some of these shows she's been on, and literally make it more difficult for her to do what she does for a living. So that's what's important about that is it shows harm.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, both sides have taken the gloves off in these legal filings. I mean, it is a war already. And Scientology's not denying things. They're basically, Scientology's coming back and say, oh yeah, we called her a bigot, we called her a racist, we called her a rape apologist. You know what? Because she is those things. And we can call her that all we want. It's free speech.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, they're not denying anything. So there's going to be a hearing next week, January 9th in LA. And it's going to be our first indication. It's just Scientology is trying to strike some of the lawsuit and it's our going to be kind of our first indication of where the judge is as far as this large picture of, is it just about name calling? Is it more about real damage? It's going to be interesting to see how he talks about things at that hearing. I think it's going to be huge. So, yeah, really important lawsuit with somebody that, I of course do my best to report on every little step because I know people are interested, but so is the rest of the media.
Mhm.
I mean, they'll kind of ignore some of the things going on in some of the Masterson case and some of the other litigation going on, but every step of Leah's lawsuit is making the news, and that's just really bad news for the Church of Scientology.
That's right. Exactly. Because they are making their entire soapbox defense is First Amendment, baby. We can say whatever we want. That's it. End of story. And it's not true. You are not free from the consequences of your speech. This is really important, and this is what the whole basis, I think of this lawsuit is going to be. I'll say for sure that the specificity, the specifics of this lawsuit are super important. It made for huge filings, pages and pages and documents, and even tweets being, entered as evidence. But that's what you need. One of the failings that we have seen over the years with some lawsuits have been a lack of that specificity, right? Of the details of here's how they did it. Because the court, you have to assume the court knows nothing. And
Right.
you got to show them everything. And
Yeah.
and too often with the, let's say, cut rate lawyers that have sometimes been used in earlier lawsuits, they don't get that level of detail or work done in the filings, and that's what makes all the difference when it comes to dismissing them or moving them forward and getting them in front of a jury. So
Well, and look, Leah's goal is to get this before a jury,
mhm,
and Scientology knows that right now in the preliminaries with no jury, they can take this attitude like,
yep,
yeah, we can call you whatever we want, but in front of a jury, with some competent attorneys saying this is a church, calling people these names using these ridiculous pictures and memes, and they're disgusting, and they're accosting her family. They know that's not going to play in front of a jury. They're not going to be sympathetic to a church saying we can call people a bigot if we want. That's not going to play. So Scientology is just going to do everything it can to keep this from getting to a jury.
that's right.
And that's why I say this January 9th hearing is so important, is that they're taking an early step to try to really harm the lawsuit. And what Leah would like is this judge just to say, hey, let's let a jury decide. Let's just, no, I'm not going to take anything out of the lawsuit. Let's let the jury decide. That's just like really bad for Scientology. And so that's what we're looking for, to see if that's his attitude, or if more, he feels like, well, she's a public person and they can say what they want. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting.
It will be. It will be very interesting to watch this play out. First Amendment's always the most interesting and truly labyrinthian. I mean, they get really complicated on these little points, right? And you really start seeing how the law works when you get into this stuff. So it's going to be fascinating. Now there was another legal point which we can bring up, which was just recent. Uh, Rico being added to the
Oh,
Bixler lawsuit. What?
right.
Whoa! What's that?
Right. So the
Right?
Jane Does actually filed their lawsuit against Danny Masterson and the Church of Scientology before Danny was even criminally charged. They filed, the investigation began in the fall of 2016. By 2019, they were, when are they going to file charges against this guy? So they filed a lawsuit in 2019 about the harassment. They weren't suing him over for raping them. They were suing over the harassment they said they were going through.
Yep.
Initially, the judge agreed with Scientology that because they had been Scientologists and signed contracts, that this had to go to arbitration.
Mm-hmm.
But then an appeals court said, hang on, wait a minute. They're alleging things like stalking and harassment and the poisoning of their pets, which all happened after they left the church. So they should not be held to contracts they signed while they were still in. So
Yep.
it got restored, but then it got put on hold during the criminal trials. So this lawsuit's been around for a while. And now it's gotten going again. And Scientology's, like in Leah's case, they've made a motion to strike. They're trying to gut the lawsuit. But I remember I was telling readers, like, that's kind of strange because we know a new version of this lawsuit is coming.
Mhm.
Even Scientology said we know it's coming. But so finally, the new proposed amended complaint was filed this week in court. It's proposed. The judge has to approve it.
Mm.
But it's just a completely new lawsuit because not only are the same people suing as before, the three Jane Does, one of their husbands, and then an additional woman, Babette Realis, who was not in the trials, but who alleges she was also sexually assaulted by Masterson. And now they're going to add a sixth plaintiff, which is Trisha Vesey, the actress who testified in the first trial and alleges she was raped by Masterson way back in 1996 when he was only like 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to add her, but the biggest news is they're adding civil RICO charges. RICO is racketeering it was adopted in 1970. It was basically Congress wanted the law enforcement to have a tool to go against the mafia with.
Right.
And that's this racketeering charge. But it's been used for many other things. The Catholic Church has been sued with RICO charges. And so what they're now alleging is that, and also they're really important, they've added in the rape charges. So it's not just about harassment. They are adding sexual battery as one of the charges.
Okay.
So, but they're with the RICO charges, what they're saying is Scientology is a criminal enterprise. And I made sure and quoted that whole introduction because I knew people were going to want to see that language that David Miscavige is leading a criminal racketeering enterprise in order to bring in more money and in order to shut down people that oppose them. And that's what this was really all about. Now, the RICO charges that comes with some hurdles that the plaintiffs are going to have to get over. They're going to have to prove that David Miscavige is at the head of this enterprise and that they're breaking the law. And you know it's got some hurdles to it, but it's hey, I think people have been waiting a long time to hear those words that Scientology is a criminal enterprise. And Pete Griffiths asked me a great question. He said, if they're successful and they prove in court that Scientology is a criminal enterprise, shouldn't that then jeopardize their tax exempt status? What a great question. Of course, we'd like to see the federal government go after the Church of Scientology with criminal RICO charges,
Correct.
not just civil RICO charges.
That's right.
So it's a big step. It's exciting. I don't know exactly what is involved in the judge approving it or not approving it. I'm sure Scientology will be howling in protest very soon, and we'll get to see what their arguments are against this. But wow, this lawsuit just got put on, steroids, and it
Yeah.
is just massively more consequential. And of course, they can do this now because Danny's sitting in prison. The convictions really help all the litigation against Scientology.
Right.
And just a year ago, I remember we didn't know if Danny was going to be tried again. We didn't know if this case was going to go anywhere. Boy, a year later, I have to say, Scientology is really on the back foot in court. And so I think 2024 could be very painful for them.
I could not agree more. This is very, very exciting. The second I saw Rico, I was like, wait a minute, what? Because I've been name dropping that thing for months in terms of Scientology and how it should be gone after. And I'm not a law expert. This is something I was actually going to do more research on. But RICO is exactly like you said, how the mafia gets taken down. It's designed to go after people who can't normally be gone after because there's layers of protection and people who will literally fall on their swords for the leader so that they're not ever found culpable or responsible for the things they are culpable and responsible for. Right? When you have people who are unwilling to testify, and how do you get to that mob boss? How do you get to him? Right? Well, this is how you do it. But it requires, it's an intricate, complicated legal process to argue RICO. So we'll see how this goes. And I didn't even know, to be honest with you, that you could go at it in a civil lawsuit and bring that. So it's going to be very interesting to watch this play out. And I'm sure that whoever is monitoring or watching that grand jury has probably got their eyebrows raised a little bit on this one too, because this is like, oh, let's take a look and see how this plays in a civil arena, right, as opposed to criminal. So I'm very, very excited by this, and there will probably be more work on this coming in 24, is figuring out, is this a legit way to go after them, and it looks like it is. So let's see what the judge says in response to this lawsuit. This is really, really exciting stuff, though.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's a very, very difficult legal thing. We've been talking about it for years. Why can't the FBI just go after Scientology as though it's so simple, especially with a religion? I'm telling you, you guys, this is really complicated for the law enforcement agencies. So this is really, I don't know, it'd be great if it just kind of cut the Gordian knot on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, last thing I'm going to talk about, at least as far as our year-end wrap-up, was some really great news and results out of it, which was the IAS protest. One, we had the return of the IAS event, and it was supposed to be this great big thing, and Tom Cruise comes in a helicopter, and it's going to be the biggest "We're Back" event of the year. And then Alex and company just throw a total monkey in the wrench, right? What was the story with this thing?
Right. So, Alex Barnes Ross was a staffer at the London org, and he's been out for several years, but he decided to start, agitating a little bit. He's really been doing a great job this year, making himself known, making videos. And when we got the word that David Miscavige was going to restore the IAS event to the big tent at St. Hill in East Grinstead, England, and it's traditionally it's a 3-day event in October. They had to move it back to the first weekend in November this time, but the first night, David Miscavige gives them this big 2-hour long speech about the state of Scientology, how great everything is. The second night, they come back and he recognizes the big donors at what's called the Patrons Ball, and all the big donors get their new trophies. And then the third night is the charity concert where they invite some locals and give away some money to some local charities. And Alex announced he was going to have a protest on all 3 nights, which I don't think anybody's ever done before.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it was going to be basically the biggest protest out there since the anonymous days.
Yep.
I mean, it wasn't a huge protest, but it was so well done because, he's a marketing guy, and he had put together some really professional looking signs, and the tone of it was perfect, where he was protesting Scientology's abuses, but not individual Scientologists. And he
Right.
made that plain. And they were out there because they wanted to help people leave Scientology, not to scream at them for being Scientologists.
Right.
And I think, what the footage we've seen, they did such a good job. And it seems clear that on Sunday during the day, they just by standing out in the street, they disrupted this opening that David Miscavige was going to have of this new qual facility at
Yep.
St. Hill, and that Miscavige himself chickened out.
Yeah.
He was supposed to give this speech,
Right.
and he left and put Aaron Banks up there to do it.
Yep.
And we've seen a picture that Scientology itself has published where you can barely see Alex's sign way off in the distance. It's like, really? That scared David Miscavige that much?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a small protest, but with a big effect. And I think he did a great job. Now, but I will say that you also have to point out that David Miscavige returning the IAS event to St. Hill, and then only a few weeks later recording the New Year's event in Los Angeles.
Yep.
And last night they were showing that video all around the world to all the Scientologists, Happy New Year. That's a big story too. I know some people don't want to hear it, but from the Scientologist point of view,
Yep.
this was a great year. They're back on track. They've survived the pandemic. Dave is holding events internationally now. Now we know they're struggling. We know they're having a hard time staffing anything, but David Miscavige has made this move and also at the Patrons Ball in England. Man, we have never seen so many $1 million plus donors ever.
Yep.
So at the same time, we know they're hurting for membership and recruitment. We know that they're having a hard time staffing ideal orgs. We know ideal orgs are empty around the world. David Miscavige still has this talent for convincing very wealthy people to turn over huge sums of money. And that's really what's keeping Scientology in business, Chris. I think it is.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Recently had a chat with Alex about this whole thing, and they'll go up in a week or two. This is absolutely what it's about, is those patrons, those whales, right? And making that money, making that money. Those are the guys that he has to keep happy, the men and women of Scientology that Miscavige's mainline focuses on. And I think that the expansion of more photos, more honors or awards being given and shown and photographed, and Miscavige being there in those photos. This is all, playing to that Scientology status button. And that's at the highest levels of Scientology. That's what it's all about. It's all about status. And it used to be about what OT level you were on, and to a degree that's still there, but you can clearly see so much that it's all about what's your status level in the IAS as to what value you bring as a Scientologist, right? How much money have you given? It's always been about the money, always has. We can talk about the smoke and mirrors of auditing and training and books and lectures and all that all day long. We really can, but it's all smoke and mirrors for the money. That's my bottom line on Scientology, in a practical sense, Okay. Well, Tony, thank you very much for joining me for this year-end wrap-up. Quite a year, and here we are kicking off 24. I guess I'm going to ask, rather than ask you, I'll spring this on you, is rather than what's coming up this week, any predictions for 24? Any ideas you have about what you think might roll out this year, or what you'd like to see?
Well, I'm really impressed at all of this litigation, and I think we could see some major developments in court that may finally convince the government they need to step in. I can't predict it's going to happen this year, but it's going that way. I mean, if they can, if the Jane Does can prove that Scientology is a criminal enterprise, if Leah Remini can prove that Scientology practices this horrible fair game with so much press coverage going on,
Yep.
These brave women are just leading the way. And I can't wait to see where it goes, but I hate to predict anything.
Of course. Of course. I suck at predictions. I tell people straight up, don't listen to a goddamn word I have to say about the future. So who knows, right? Who knows what's going to happen? What we do know for sure, and what I can say with absolute certainty, is no matter what you think 24 is bringing, it's going to surprise you. And hopefully it will surprise us in pleasant ways when it comes to prosecution of Scientology or other cults out there, right? This topic has never had a higher degree of awareness in the public consciousness out there. And in the knowledge of what the red flags of these groups are, and what these predatory individuals are who go after folks and want to coercively control them and ruin their lives. And so stay tuned here, because we will keep covering this every week, all year. This show's not going anywhere.
Let me point out one other thing that happened. Another very good thing that happened in 2023, and that is you invited me to do this show. I'm really grateful, and we've had a lot of fun.
That's right. Thank you. That's right. Yeah, this has been a great show. And this is going to be, for my channel, the continuation of talking about Scientology, because I've got a few projects to wrap up, and then I'm really not talking about Scientology anymore, but for this show. And we're going to keep you guys informed every week on what's going on in that world. So really just kind of keep coming around and watching, and we're going to keep bringing it to you. On that happy note, subscribe to Tony's Substack. The address is right there on the screen. And I'm having some computer issues. If it all works out, I'll edit this out. But maybe today I'll throw it up on the screen right now. There you go. There's Tony's address. So get up there and subscribe to his Substack. Get your daily notifications, get your daily news on this. Subscribe to my channel. I've got lots and lots of really good stuff for you in terms of cult recovery, cult education, and cult abuses, and exposing those things. And on that, I'll see you guys next week.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.